All right, kiddos. Today we're going to talk about Kingdom Protista, which is the weirdest kingdom in all the kingdoms of life. So we have Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, Kingdom Fungi, and then you have the two bacteria kingdoms. And protists are right in the middle, and they're the junk drawer of the classification system. So everything that doesn't quite go anywhere else goes here. And so you have this weird variety of organisms, with most of them being microscopic. So let's jump right in. So with protists, a lot of them live in moist environments. So they're either in the water or reliant on water. And because they're the junk drawer, you get both unicellular or one-celled organisms and multicellular, many-celled organisms. The unicellular organisms also sometimes stick together in colonies, like this over here to the side. These little circular guys are called volvox. They're a kind of algae because algae is a protist, not a plant. And these are individual cells in here, and they live together in this colony. And the difference between a colony and a multicellular organism is that these cells can be teased apart and they'll still survive. Whereas in a multicellular organism, that doesn't work that way. They do lack true tissues, like the cells are not differentiated like the cells are in our bodies. They're all the same kind of cells, and they just group together in these little bubbles. But all prokaryotes are eukaryotic, which means they have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Remember, euky, nuky. The only ones that are prokaryotic are bacteria. Because it's a junk drawer, you have both autotrophs. Autotrophs make their food automatically through photosynthesis, which is what Volvox does over here. That's why he's green, so you can always tell your photosynthesis guys because they're green. And some of them are heterotrophic. Hetero means different, so they're eating different things. So they're eating the other organisms is what they're doing. They're both sexual and asexual reproduction depending on the species. So junk drawer, a little bit of everything. We have three major groups of protists. We have the protozoa, which are the animal-like protists. So you can think zoa as like for zoo, all the animals in the zoo. You got algae. Algae is, it's in the ocean and it is green, and also in the lakes, freshwater as well. So they are plant-like protists. They're going to be doing photosynthesis. And then we have the ones that you're probably least familiar with are the slime molds, and they are slimy. And those are your fungus-like protists. Altogether, there are over 50,000 different species of protists. So how do these guys move? Part of how we classify them is by how they move. So we have cilia. Cilia are these short hair-like projections. We talked about them with our organelles. So this little paramecium here has all these little short cilia that they beat together like oars on a ship, and it helps to move them forward. Pseudopodium. Pseudo means fake. Podia has to do with feet. So these are false feet or fake feet, and that's what this amoeba has over here. See these little projections? What they do is they push their cytoplasm out, which stretches out their cell membrane, and they make these little temporary legs or false feet. And they use these to then pull their body behind. Their cytoplasm just streams. And they also use them to capture prey when they do endocytosis. So false feet for pseudopodium. Then we got flagella. Flagella are very similar to cilia, but in cilia are short and hair-like. Flagella are long and whip-like. So this euglena right here, you can see this long skinny thing coming off the end. That's the flagella, just like the tail on a sperm cell. And so it's going to whip around and help them move. So short, hair-like, false feet, and long, whip-like. Then we got sporozoa. These guys have no movement as adults. So they're typically parasites. That's their lifestyle. They're parasitic. So here I have malaria. So malaria, once it gets inside your body, and we'll look at malaria a little bit more in a bit, they live inside your blood cells, in your own blood cells or in your liver cells, and they don't move after that part. They just reproduce. So let's talk protozoa a little more, our animal-like protists. Ecologically, a lot of the protozoas have little hard shells on them. They're part of zooplankton. So you have phytoplankton, which is the part of plankton that does photosynthesis, and zooplankton, which is little animals, all right, because zoo, again, for animals. So these guys are a major food source in the ecosystem. They're not at the bottom of the food chain, but they're one up from that, okay? And so within here, you have all these little protozoa. You also have little baby lobsters and stuff like that. That's not part of the protozoa. But things like baleen whales will eat these. Baby fish will eat them, larger fish. They also, when they die, because of these shell-like structures that they have, when their little bodies compress over time, they can actually make stone. They can make limestone. And so this picture is the White Cliffs of Dover. And they're white because they're made out of basically the little skeletons of all these protists over millions of years. So a lot of protists also cause disease. So amoebic dysentery. Dysentery might be one that you have heard of if you ever played the Oregon Trail when you were kids. That attacks your intestines and then spreads throughout your body, and it can cause cysts and chronic diarrhea. So usually when you get amoebic dysentery from drinking dirty water, like water that has not been filtered, like streams, this is when you actually die of dehydration from the chronic diarrhea. Then you can get African sleeping sickness. This is transported by what's called the tsetse fly. All right, so, and this is actually a really pretty protist. Looks like it's very pretty, but it does, the stuff it costs is not very pretty at all. So the tsetse fly comes in and it bites you, and in its saliva it has this protist. And so at first you feel just kind of tired and you're kind of confused, and you go home and you lay down and you slip into a coma, hence the name African sleeping sickness. So this gentleman right here is in a coma. He's got some foam coming out of his mouth. He is a victim of the protozoa African sleeping sickness. Giardia is another one. Giardia, we've had Giardia outbreaks in the United States in the 1980s up near Seattle when they had a whole lot of rain and it overflowed the water treatment plants. And so people were advised to boil their water, but not everybody listened. And so when the water treatment plants overflowed, the water got contaminated and Giardia bloomed in there. So it's found in contaminated water. And then when people drank the water that was coming in through their faucets because it wasn't treated, they got this cute little protist, Giardia, which causes severe diarrhea, and it ended up killing a bunch of people in Seattle. And who it usually kills is old people or really young people. The rest of us, we just have really bad diarrhea, but can typically withstand that if you're a healthy individual. Then there's malaria, and I will post this little video of malaria for you. Malaria is carried by mosquitoes, all right? It's not here in the United States yet. It's found typically in Africa. And the mosquito bites you, and again in its saliva, it transports the malaria protist. And the malaria protist then attacks your red blood cells, and you tend to get chills and fevers. You get very tired because your body is lacking oxygen from red blood cells being destroyed. You get anemic for the same reason. And then they go into your kidneys and damage your kidney cells too. And then the lack of oxygen could eventually lead to brain damage. So malaria is quite serious. And so if you do travel somewhere where malaria is prevalent, you need to take anti-malarial drugs. So here's the life cycle of malaria, but I'm going to post that video that you can check out. Then we got our algae, our plant-like protists. These guys all have photosynthetic pigments like chlorophyll, and so they tend to be green. They differ in the type of food storage that they have and also the composition of the cell wall. So their cell wall is made out of different stuff than plants are. Plant cell walls are made out of cellulose and theirs are not, which is part of the reason why they are plant-like and not actually plants. So as far as our phytoplankton, they have lots and lots of uses. They're, of course, the base of the food chain, especially the aquatic food chain. So the zooplankton feeds on this, and then everything else feeds on the zooplankton. Also, because they tend to be sticky on their cell walls, they're used a lot in a lot of products as something to hold things together. So they're used in cosmetics. So if you put eyeshadow on or blush or foundation, there's a good chance that there is some phytoplankton in there. Even Jell-O has phytoplankton in it and some cheeses. It's also used as what's called diatomaceous earth because some of these phytoplankton have these kind of hard, scrapey exoskeleton type structures. And so they put it in toothpaste to help clean the stuff off your teeth. It's used in fertilizers. It's also used as a natural flea remedy because the fleas are so tiny, they walk through the stuff and it scrapes the flea's exoskeleton and dehydrates the fleas, and then they die. And it's also found in paint remover, so it's all kinds of scrapey stuff. And they're also using algae as a form of biofuel. So algae actually cleans water as the water flows through. So they take dirty water off of like power plants, run it through these algae tubes, and the algae reproduce very quickly, kind of like bacteria do. And they clean the water in the process using that contamination as a fuel. And then you harvest the algae and make biofuels out of it. Algae can also be really problematic. We have this thing called red tide, and this happened in Florida a couple of years ago. This is a type of algae. It's a red algae. If you see red algae, you need to get out of the water because it releases a toxin. And so when this happened in Florida, all the sea life was dying and getting washed up onto the beach, and they had to close all the beaches, which of course had an economic effect. And this happens in the water when the water has too much nutrients in it, so it has been contaminated with things. In Florida, it was because they drained part of the Everglades water into the beach, which was a really bad choice. And then they got these algae flumes that are toxic to people and the animals that live in water. And that, of course, economically affected that region. So poor choices in science have effects. Then we got our slime molds. Slime molds are colonial. Typically, they have an individual unicellular component to the lifespan, and then after that, they reproduce and they make these colonies as part of the life cycle. This one right here is actually called the dog barf slime mold because it looks like dog vomit, more or less. So all these guys are typically slimy, really gross looking kind of things, and they are fungus-like, but not exactly the same because they don't have the same system under the ground that the fungi do. So why are they important? They are decomposers, just like fungi are, so they play an important role in putting nutrients back into the soil. And why they might be a problem is basically they're just ugly and they can grow all over your plants, so especially if you're a gardener and you get a slime mold colony that's going to grow over your plants, the plants can't do photosynthesis underneath there, so it could damage your plants, and they're damaged with these just really ugly looking things. All right, guys, so that's your protists. See you later.